On a quiet morning at Westbridge Academy, the campus buzzed with the usual rhythm of academia. Students shuffled through stone courtyards. Professors carried stacks of papers, ready for another day of intellectual rigor. At the helm of it all stood Dr. Nathaniel Carmichael, the revered dean whose name was synonymous with excellence. Dr. Carmichael wasn't just a leader. He was a symbol of achievement, a man celebrated for transforming Westbridge Academy into one of the most prestigious universities in the nation. His portrait, hanging prominently in the Great Hall, bore a polished smile, a reminder of the legacy he had built over decades. But behind the polished smile and academic accolades, a storm was brewing. A storm that would bring everything he had built to the ground. This wasn't just a scandal. This was a fall from grace, so spectacular, so devastating that it left the entire community in shock. It started with whispers, hushed conversations in hallways, curious glances during faculty meetings, and students questioning why their once charismatic dean was suddenly absent from public events. But what began as speculation soon spiraled into undeniable truth. Dr. Carmichael wasn't away on sabbatical. He was sick, gravely sick. And the cause? A secret so dark, so shocking, that it would soon unravel not only his career but his entire life. The name Samantha Reed began to surface in conversations, a name few had noticed before. The dean's secretary, quiet, diligent, always in the background. Samantha was the kind of employee who blended into the fabric of the university, unnoticed, except for her precision and professionalism. But now, her name was on everyone's lips, whispered alongside words like revenge and scandal. No one could have predicted what was about to unfold. Samantha Reed wasn't just any secretary. She was a woman harboring a secret of her own. A secret that, when combined with years of pain and manipulation, turned into a weapon she used with chilling precision to dismantle the life of the man who had wronged her. Dr. Carmichael's pristine reputation began to crumble piece by piece. The once celebrated dean became the subject of relentless news coverage. The headlines told one story, a respected academic caught in scandal, but the truth, hidden beneath layers of manipulation and deceit, told another. What would drive someone like Samantha Reed to such an extreme act of revenge? And how could a man as powerful as Dr. Carmichael fall so completely, so publicly, at the hands of someone he underestimated? This is the story of abuse, betrayal, and justice, twisted into an act of calculated revenge. A story where power collides with vulnerability and secrets buried deep within Westbridge Academy refuse to stay hidden. Stay with us as we uncover the truth behind the fall of Dr. Nathaniel Carmichael. To understand the depths of this story, we must first look at the two lives intertwined in this scandal. Dr. Nathaniel Carmichael, the powerful dean of Westbridge Academy, and Samantha Reed, the secretary whose life would forever change the course of his legacy. Dr. Nathaniel Carmichael was a man who knew how to command a room. Born into a modest family in Charleston, South Carolina, his rise to prominence was nothing short of remarkable. His academic brilliance and relentless drive propelled him through the ranks. First as an adjunct professor, then as a tenured faculty member, and finally as the youngest dean in Westbridge Academy's storied history. By the time he reached his 50s, Carmichael was more than just a university administrator. He was a symbol of success. His list of accomplishments seemed endless. Published author, keynote speaker at global conferences, and recipient of numerous awards for his contributions to higher education. His face graced university brochures, and his name was whispered with reverence in academic circles. Students idolized him, faculty respected him. The media celebrated him as a thought leader, a beacon of integrity in an often chaotic academic world. But underneath the polished exterior of accolades and accomplishments lay a far darker reality. Carmichael wasn't just a man of power. He was a man who knew how to wield it for his own benefit. Behind closed doors, whispers of inappropriate behavior circulated among staff. Female faculty members and assistants would quietly exchange knowing glances when his name was mentioned. But few dared to speak out. Carmichael had cultivated an image so pristine, so untouchable, that any accusation would be met with skepticism at best and professional ruin at worst. He had a pattern. Identify someone vulnerable, a junior faculty member desperate for tenure, a student assistant eager for a glowing recommendation, or a secretary reliant on her paycheck. With charm and calculated flattery, he would draw them into his orbit, creating a toxic mix of admiration and fear. And when they resisted or pushed back, his power ensured their silence. Complaints were buried, careers were derailed, and reputations were destroyed, all to protect the man at the helm of Westbridge Academy. Samantha Reed's story couldn't have been more different. At 29, she was quiet, determined, and resourceful. Born and raised in a small town in Georgia, Samantha learned early on the value of hard work. Her parents, both factory workers, instilled in her a belief that education was the key to escaping a life of struggle. But Samantha's path was never easy. After losing her parents in her early 20s, she took on the responsibility of raising her younger brother, Ethan, who was just 14 at the time. Every dollar she earned went toward keeping a roof over their heads and ensuring Ethan had the opportunities she never did. By the time he secured a scholarship to college, Samantha had worked countless long hours and sacrificed her own dreams to make it happen. Yet life's challenges didn't stop there. In her mid-20s, Samantha found herself in an abusive relationship with a man who hid his HIV-positive status. The betrayal left her scarred, physically and emotionally. The diagnosis was devastating. She spent years grappling with shame, fear, and the overwhelming weight of stigma. But Samantha was resilient. She managed her condition with strict discipline, determined to rebuild her life and protect her brother's future. When she landed a job at Westbridge Academy as Dr. Carmichael's secretary, it felt like a turning point. The university's prestigious reputation and the dean's accolades made her believe she had finally secured a stable position, one that could support her brother and allow her to start anew. For Samantha, it wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. But Samantha would soon learn that beneath the grandeur of Westbridge Academy and the polished persona of Dr. Nathaniel Carmichael lay a world far more treacherous than she had imagined. What began as a golden opportunity quickly turned into a harrowing ordeal, one that would test every ounce of strength she had. When Samantha first stepped into Dr. Carmichael's office, she was struck by his presence. Towering bookshelves lined the walls, and accolades gleamed under soft lighting. The man behind the desk, confident, articulate, and charismatic, seemed every bit the leader she had read about. He welcomed her warmly, praised her credentials, and assured her she would thrive under his mentorship. But as the weeks went by, the cracks began to show. Carmichael's initial warmth gave way to an unsettling familiarity. Comments about her work turned into compliments about her appearance. Meetings that should have been professional stretched late into the evenings, with Carmichael finding reasons to keep her in his office. And yet, Samantha, eager to prove herself, convinced herself that these were just quirks of a busy man. What Samantha didn't yet realize was that she had become Carmichael's latest target, a pawn in a game he had played many times before. A game where he held all the power, and those who resisted often found themselves without recourse. For Samantha, this was just the beginning. As the lines between professionalism and exploitation blurred, she would soon find herself trapped in a web of manipulation, fear, and moral compromise. And what began as a fight for survival would turn into something far more calculated. Samantha Reed had always prided herself on her professionalism. For months, she carried out her duties with precision, managing schedules, coordinating meetings, and ensuring the smooth operation of Dr. Nathaniel Carmichael's office. To those around her, she was the perfect secretary, efficient, composed, and reliable. But behind the scenes, a darker reality was beginning to unfold. It started small, barely noticeable at first. Dr. Tara Carmichael's initial interactions with Samantha seemed courteous, even kind. He complimented her on her organizational skills, her punctuality, and the way she brought order to his chaotic schedule. But over time, those compliments shifted. "You have an eye for detail, Samantha," he would say, his voice lingering just a second too long. Or, you have a way of making this office feel brighter." At first, Samantha dismissed these remarks as harmless pleasantries, but then they became more personal. "That blouse suits you," he mentioned one afternoon, a casual smile crossing his face. "Then, you should wear your hair down more often. It frames your face nicely." Samantha responded with polite smiles, brushing off his comments as best she could. But inside, a sense of unease began to take root. It wasn't just the words, it was the way his eyes lingered. the proximity he maintained during conversations, and the occasional touch on her shoulder or arm that lasted a beat too long. Samantha told herself she was imagining things, that she was overreacting. After all, this was the dean of Westbridge Academy, a man revered for his intellect and leadership. Surely, he wouldn't cross any lines. By the third month of her employment, the interactions had escalated. Dr. Carmichael began creating situations that required Samantha to work late, long after the rest of the staff had gone home. "I need you to help me organize these conference notes," he would say. "Or let's review these donor proposals together. I need your input." The task seemed legitimate, but Samantha noticed a pattern. These requests always came in the late afternoon, just as the office was emptying out for the day. On one such evening, while Samantha was sorting through files in his office, Carmichael leaned in close, pointing to a document on her desk. She froze as his hand brushed hers, lingering just a second too long. "You're such a lifesaver, Samantha," he said softly, his voice carrying an intimacy that made her stomach churn. Samantha tried to set boundaries, politely but firmly. She started leaving her office as soon as the workday ended, excusing herself from late-night tasks whenever possible. But Carmichael always found a way to keep her close. "You're an essential part of this team," he told her one evening. "I can't imagine running this office without you." At first, his words felt like validation of her hard work, but then came the implications. "You know," he added, "not everyone appreciates what you bring to the table. Some might see you as replaceable, but I don't." Samantha understood the subtext. Her job security wasn't just about her performance, it was about staying in Carmichael's good graces. The pressure intensified. Carmichael began to frame his requests as favors, reminding Samantha of how much he'd done for her. "You're lucky to be in this position," he said one evening, handing her a stack of documents. "I chose you because I saw potential." Soon, Samantha found herself spending more and more time in his private office. The space, which had once felt professional and dignified, now felt suffocating. Carmichael's tone grew more personal, his gaze more piercing. And with every passing day, Samantha felt her control slipping away. In desperation, Samantha sought a way out. She approached the Human Resources Department, requesting a transfer to another division. She cited workload concerns, hoping to distance herself from Carmichael without raising suspicion. But her request was denied. When she pressed for a reason, the response was chillingly vague. "The dean values your contributions too much to let you go." Samantha knew exactly what that meant. Carmichael had blocked her escape. Fear began to creep into her daily life. She thought about filing a formal complaint, but hesitated. Who would believe her? Dr. Carmichael was a man of stature, a pillar of the university. She was just a secretary, a replaceable employee with no one in her corner. And even if someone did believe her, the consequences would be catastrophic. A complaint against the dean would mean professional suicide. If she lost her job, how would she support Ethan? How would she afford her medication, her rent, her brother's tuition? With no viable options, Samantha resolved to endure. She kept her head down, avoided confrontation, and focused on her work. But the more she tried to retreat, the more Carmichael pushed, tightening his grip on her life. For Samantha, the walls were closing in. The man she once saw as a mentor had become a predator. And as her world grew smaller, her resolve grew stronger. What she didn't realize yet was that she would soon find a way to fight back, a way that would change both their lives forever. For months, Samantha Reed tried to maintain her professionalism in the face of relentless harassment. She endured the late-night meetings, the lingering touches, and the veiled threats. But one fateful day, a public encounter pushed her past the point of no return. It was during a routine departmental meeting in Westbridge Academy's grand conference room. Faculty and staff gathered to discuss the upcoming semester's initiatives, and Samantha, as always, sat quietly at the edge of the table, diligently taking notes. But as the meeting progressed, Dr. Carmichael's tone shifted. He began addressing minor administrative issues with an unusual sharpness, his words pointed and cutting. Then, without warning, his attention turned to Samantha. "Samantha, these reports are incomplete. How do you expect us to function efficiently if the data I need isn't ready on time?" His voice carried across the room, drawing the startled attention of the other staff. Samantha froze, her cheeks flushing as every eye in the room turned toward her. She knew the reports were fine. She had double-checked them herself the night before. But Carmichael wasn't interested in accuracy. He was making a statement. He wanted to remind her, in front of everyone, who held the power. Samantha attempted to defend herself. "I followed the guidelines you provided, Dr. Carmichael," she said, her voice steady but laced with frustration. He dismissed her response with a wave of his hand. "We'll discuss this later," he said curtly, signaling an end to the public humiliation. Later that evening, as the office emptied and Samantha prepared to leave, Carmichael called her into his private office. The room felt heavier than usual, the silence oppressive. Samantha hesitated at the door but forced herself to step inside. Carmichael didn't look up from his desk. "Close the door," he said. The click of the lock echoed louder than it should have. Carmichael finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "You embarrassed me today, Samantha. I expect better from someone in your position." His words were calm, but the undercurrent of menace was unmistakable. Samantha met his gaze, her frustration boiling over. "With all due respect, Dr. Carmichael, the reports were complete. I did my job." His face darkened. "Let me make something clear," he said, standing and stepping closer. "You're in this position because I put you here, and if you don't start showing the proper appreciation, I can just as easily find someone else." Samantha's heart raced. The implication was clear. Her career, her livelihood, her future, it all hung on his whim. Carmichael reached out, his hand brushing her arm. "Think about it, Samantha," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "We could work so well together if you'd stop being so difficult." Samantha pulled away, anger and fear coursing through her veins. She left his office without another word, her mind reeling. That night, she sat in her small apartment, staring at the flickering glow of her laptop screen, and for the first time, she allowed herself to think of revenge. Samantha knew she couldn't fight Carmichael on equal footing. His power, his connections, and his untouchable reputation meant that any formal complaint would lead to her downfall, not his. But she had something he didn't: knowledge of her own status, knowledge she could turn into a weapon. It was a dark thought, one that made her stomach turn. But as the hours passed, it began to crystallize into something more: a plan. If Carmichael wanted control, Samantha would let him think he had it, and in doing so, she would take hers back. She began by documenting everything: every text message, every voicemail, every inappropriate comment or gesture. Samantha logged it all in meticulous detail. She purchased a voice recorder, slipping it into her purse during meetings to capture his words. She even saved receipts from late-night office supply purchases, creating a timeline of her increasing workload under his demands. Each piece of evidence felt like a step closer to reclaiming her agency. But Samantha knew she needed more. If she wanted to protect herself, she needed to ensure there was no room for doubt. And so, she made a calculated decision: she would initiate an affair. It began with a single text. Late one evening, Samantha sent Carmichael a message. "I've been thinking about what you said. Maybe you're right. We should discuss things further." His response was almost immediate. "I knew you'd see it my way," he replied, along with the address of a discreet hotel just outside the city. Samantha felt a wave of nausea as she prepared for their first meeting. She wore a dress he had once complimented, knowing it would appeal to his ego. The moment she stepped into the dimly lit hotel room, she felt a deep sense of detachment. Every interaction, every word, every touch, she forced herself to catalog it with clinical precision. Carmichael, oblivious to her true intentions, reveled in what he believed to be his triumph. "I told you we'd make a great team," he said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. Samantha smiled faintly, her mind already working through the next steps. She saved the hotel receipt, noting the date and time. She recorded snippets of their conversation on her phone, careful not to arouse suspicion. And after the night was over, she returned home to write in her journal. Day 1. Evidence secured. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued. Carmichael grew bolder, his arrogance blinding him to the trap Samantha was setting. And with each encounter, her collection of evidence grew, a damning archive of his words, his actions, and his disregard for consequences. Samantha had taken control of the game, but the stakes were higher than ever. As Carmichael's health began to falter, the balance of power shifted in ways neither of them could have anticipated. What started as an act of survival was about to spiral into something far more destructive. For months, Samantha Reed had carefully documented every interaction, every word, and every move. But as the weeks passed, the consequences of her plan began to unfold, not just in private, but in ways that would ripple across Westbridge Academy. It began subtly. At first, Dr. Nathaniel Carmichael brushed off the persistent fatigue that seemed to follow him everywhere. "Too many late nights," he muttered to his assistant one morning, rubbing his temples as he sipped his third cup of coffee before noon. But the fatigue didn't go away, it worsened. By the second month, Carmichael started losing weight. His tailored suits hung loosely on his frame, and his once confident stride seemed slower, more labored. The man who had commanded attention with his presence now seemed to shrink before his colleagues' eyes. Yet when questioned, Carmichael dismissed the changes. "Stress. It's just stress," he said to one faculty member who remarked on his appearance. "Running this institution takes a toll." But behind closed doors, the toll was far greater than even he could admit. Carmichael began waking in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his sheets soaked through. His muscles ached constantly, and a low-grade fever became his new normal. Instead of seeking medical help, he doubled down on work, refusing to acknowledge what was happening to him. All the while, Samantha watched. Each new symptom was carefully noted in her journal. "Fatigue, noticeable weight loss, night sweats," she wrote one evening, the words etched with a mix of satisfaction and guilt. She saw his health unraveling before her eyes, but she forced herself to remain detached. This was the price he had to pay. As Carmichael's condition worsened, it became impossible to hide. Colleagues whispered in hushed tones about his gaunt appearance and the uncharacteristic lapses in his sharpness during meetings. Students noticed he no longer walked across campus with the same air of authority. Even his lectures, once filled with charisma, now seemed lackluster and hurried. Rumors began to spread. Some speculated he was battling a chronic illness. Others whispered about the pressures of his position finally catching up with him. But no one, not his colleagues, not his students, and certainly not the board of trustees, knew the full story. Samantha, ever the dutiful secretary, maintained her professional demeanor. To the outside world, she appeared concerned for her boss's well-being, covering for his increasing absences and taking on additional responsibilities. But inside, she watched the unfolding chaos with an unsettling mix of emotions. "He's becoming desperate," she noted in her journal after one particularly fraught meeting. "The cracks are showing." Each passing day brought her closer to the inevitable conclusion of her plan, but the weight of it all began to gnaw at her. What had started as a calculated act of revenge now felt like watching a slow-motion collapse. Among those most affected by Carmichael's deteriorating condition was his wife, Dr. Eleanor Vance. For years, Eleanor had been the silent partner in their marriage, standing by his side at public events and maintaining the image of a supportive spouse. But in private, she had long suspected that her husband's fidelity was anything but steadfast. At first, Eleanor attributed his erratic behavior to the pressures of his role. But as his health declined, her suspicions deepened. One evening, while clearing papers from his desk at home, she found a crumpled hotel receipt tucked inside a folder. The date and location made her pause. It wasn't the first clue, but it was the most damning. Determined to uncover the truth, Eleanor quietly hired a private investigator. Over the next few weeks, the investigator pieced together a disturbing puzzle. Surveillance footage, text message logs, and financial records pointed to an affair with Samantha Reed. But what shocked Eleanor most wasn't just the betrayal, it was the lengths her husband had gone to keep it hidden. Eleanor confronted Carmichael one night as he sat slumped in their living room, too weak to argue. "Who is she?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger. He tried to deflect, claiming she was imagining things. But Eleanor knew better. The cracks in his lies were too wide to ignore. As Eleanor's investigation deepened, so did the fallout. She discovered vague connections between her husband's health issues and his secret life, though the pieces didn't fully align yet. But one thing was certain. The man she had built a life with was no longer the man sitting before her. And whatever was happening to him was far from over. With his health failing, his wife's suspicions mounting, and whispers of scandal spreading across campus, Carmichael's once unshakable world was beginning to crumble. But the revelations were only just beginning. Samantha's plan, meticulously crafted and chillingly effective, was about to reach its final, devastating act. As Dr. Nathaniel Carmichael's health continued to deteriorate, the secrets he had spent years burying were beginning to surface. The once revered dean of Westbridge Academy was no longer untouchable. What started as whispers of suspicion was about to explode into a full-blown scandal that would consume everyone involved. In late November, after weeks of ignoring his worsening symptoms, Dr. Carmichael finally sought medical help. He visited a private clinic outside the city, far from the prying eyes of the Westbridge community. The doctor listened carefully as Carmichael described his fatigue, night sweats, and unexplained weight loss. Blood tests were ordered, and he was told to return in 3 days for the results. When Carmichael returned, the atmosphere in the doctor's office was heavy. The results were definitive. He had tested positive for HIV. At first, Carmichael refused to believe it. "There's no way," he said, his voice shaking. "You must have made a mistake." But the doctor was firm. The tests were conclusive. Carmichael sat in stunned silence, the weight of the diagnosis pressing down on him. Days later, Carmichael confronted Samantha in his office. She had just finished organizing his schedule when he called her in, locking the door behind her. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he held a folder of medical documents. "You need to get tested," he said abruptly, his voice filled with a mix of fear and anger. Samantha, keeping her composure, feigned confusion. "Why?" she asked, her tone steady. "What's going on?" Carmichael's frustration boiled over. "Don't play dumb with me, Samantha. I tested positive for HIV. You're the only one I've been with." Samantha took a step back, her expression a perfect blend of shock and denial. "That's impossible," she said. "I'm clean. I've always been careful." She reached for her phone, showing him her most recent test results, negative. It was a calculated move, one she had prepared for. Carmichael's face twisted with confusion. He hadn't expected this response. If Samantha wasn't the source, then who? His mind raced, grappling with the possibility that his past indiscretions might have caught up with him. Meanwhile, Dr. Eleanor Vance had been conducting her own investigation. The private investigator she hired had uncovered a troubling web of evidence linking Carmichael to Samantha. Hotel receipts, text messages, and surveillance footage painted a clear picture of their affair. Armed with this information, Eleanor confronted Carmichael once more. "You lied to me," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "I trusted you, and this is how you repay me?" Carmichael, weakened and desperate, could only stammer excuses, but Eleanor was done listening. She took the evidence to the Board of Trustees, who had no choice but to launch a formal inquiry. Word spread quickly, and soon, the local police were involved. Detective Raymond Cole, a veteran investigator known for his meticulous work on workplace harassment cases, was assigned to lead the investigation. Detective Cole began by piecing together Carmichael's recent activities. He interviewed faculty members, students, and administrative staff, uncovering a troubling pattern of behavior. Several former employees came forward, describing similar experiences of harassment and coercion at the hands of Dr. Carmichael. One former secretary, Linda Harper, broke down during questioning. "He told me no one would believe me," she said, her voice shaking. "He said he could ruin my career with one phone call." Her story, like many others, painted a damning picture of a man who had abused his power for years. As Detective Cole dug deeper, Samantha Reed's name surfaced repeatedly. She was the common thread in the timeline of events leading to Carmichael's diagnosis. But what shocked the investigators most was the meticulous nature of her documentation. Armed with a search warrant, police arrived at Samantha's apartment early one morning. Inside, they found a treasure trove of evidence, journals filled with detailed accounts of her interactions with Carmichael, audio recordings of their conversations, and even screenshots of text messages. One journal entry stood out. Day 34. Symptoms worsening. Fatigue and night sweats are consistent. He suspects nothing. They also uncovered hotel receipts, photographs, and videos that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Each piece of evidence was a testament to Samantha's careful planning and her determination to protect herself from retaliation. For Detective Cole, the case was becoming increasingly complex. On one hand, Samantha's evidence painted her as a victim, someone who had endured months of harassment and coercion. But on the other hand, her calculated actions suggested something far darker. This wasn't just self-defense. This was revenge. With the evidence piling up and Carmichael's reputation in shambles, the case was poised to take a dramatic turn. The public wanted answers. The university demanded accountability. And as the lines between victim and perpetrator blurred, one question remained. Who would pay the ultimate price for this scandal? With the scandal now public and the evidence laid bare, the story of Dr. Nathaniel Carmichael and Samantha Reed took its final turn, from the shadows of a university office to the spotlight of a courtroom. What unfolded next would leave an indelible mark, not only on their lives, but on the entire Westbridge Academy community. Samantha Reed was formally charged with aggravated assault for knowingly transmitting HIV, a felony with severe legal consequences. The trial began in a packed courtroom, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. On one side sat Samantha, composed but visibly weary, flanked by her legal team. On the other, Dr. Carmichael, frail and gaunt, his once commanding presence reduced to a shadow of its former self. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Sarah Collins, painted a damning picture of Samantha's actions. This was not a moment of weakness, Collins argued. This was a calculated act of revenge, meticulously planned and executed. The defendant knowingly and intentionally weaponized her HIV status to inflict harm. But Samantha's defense attorney, Victor Hayes, countered with a powerful narrative of his own. This is not the story of a predator and a victim, Hayes began. This is the story of a broken system that protected a man who abused his power for years. Samantha Reed did not seek out revenge. She sought survival in a workplace where her dignity was stripped away daily. The courtroom listened intently as Hayes presented evidence of Carmichael's history of harassment. Witness testimony from former employees painted a damning portrait. Linda Harper, the former secretary who had suffered under Carmichael's manipulation, took the stand. Her voice trembled as she recounted her experience. "He used his position to trap me," she said. "When I tried to leave, he threatened my career." Samantha was just another one of his victims. But the prosecution pushed back hard, arguing that Samantha's journals and recordings showed premeditation. They highlighted entries where she documented Carmichael's symptoms with cold precision. This was not an act of desperation, Collins argued. This was deliberate. The trial lasted for weeks, each day revealing new layers of the complex relationship between Carmichael and Samantha. By the time closing arguments were made, the public's opinion was sharply divided. Some saw Samantha as a hero who fought back against an abusive system. Others viewed her actions as unforgivable, no matter the circumstances. In the end, the jury delivered a mixed verdict. Samantha was found guilty of reckless endangerment, but acquitted of aggravated assault. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation and mandatory counseling, a decision that left both sides feeling unsatisfied. For Dr. Carmichael, the fallout was catastrophic. His career at Westbridge Academy was over. The Board of Trustees voted unanimously to strip him of his title and sever all ties. His marriage to Dr. Eleanor Vance ended in a highly publicized divorce, with Eleanor citing irreparable betrayal in her statement to the press. Carmichael's health stabilized with treatment, but his reputation never recovered. He became a pariah in the academic world, his name synonymous with scandal. Meanwhile, Samantha returned to a quieter life, but the scars of her experience remained. The story of Dr. Nathaniel Carmichael and Samantha Reed raises questions that have no easy answers. Was Samantha justified in her actions, or did she cross an unforgivable line? Was this an act of justice, or merely vengeance disguised as survival? It's a story that forces us to confront the power dynamics that exist in workplaces and institutions, the vulnerabilities of those caught in systems that fail to protect them, and the devastating consequences of unchecked abuse. Samantha Reed and Nathaniel Carmichael are two individuals whose lives became entangled in a web of manipulation, desperation, and retribution. In the end, justice is rarely simple, and morality often exists in shades of gray. What remains are the lessons we take from their story. a reminder of the damage power can do and the lengths to which someone will go when they feel they have no other choice. The fall of Dr. Carmichael and the rise of Samantha Reed's voice may not bring closure, but it leaves us with an enduring question. When the system fails, what are we willing to risk to reclaim our power? Thank you for watching. Let us know in the comments. What do you think? Was Samantha's act of revenge justified, or did it go too far? We'd love to hear your thoughts.